In our previous discussion, we retraced our origins to the first bipedal apes some 7 million years ago. And remarkably, we learned that we Homo sapiens are the sole survivors of what used to be a vastly diverse hominin family tree. So today, let's add to our human story. Let's bring in some geography to retrace the spread of humankind. And specifically, we'll see how humans migrated into just about every corner of the world, including the Americas. Our journey today begins with actually a thrilling scuba adventure. Now, just imagine you and your buddies, you're on a sunny Cancun vacation, and with your tanks filled and fins on your feet, it's time to jump right in that water and explore a long, mysterious tunnel. So splash, right? The water's warm, it's super clear. And with just a little encouragement from your buddies, you just keep going, deeper and deeper, until suddenly, this narrow tunnel, it opens up into this dark and monstrous cave. Flash! You turn on your scuba high beams, and they reveal a sensational subaqueous world. And it's packed with hauntingly intact skeletons. There's pumas, saber-toothed tigers, and even something that kind of looks like an elephant. But wait, what's that over there? Yeah, over there. Alone in this skeletal zoo, you'll also discover the well-preserved bones of a teenage girl. But this isn't just any girl. When researchers examine your find, this turns out to be a teenage skeleton from someone who lived some 12,000 years ago. Literally, you've made the discovery of a lifetime, or to be honest, thousands of lifetimes for that matter. And get this, that scuba story, well, it actually happened. In 2007, a software engineer and his avid scuba diver friends, they accidentally discovered one of the oldest human skeletons ever found in the Americas. And they named her Naya, after the Naiads, who were mythical Greek water nymphs. Naya, she may have been alone the past 12,000 years, but now we can all celebrate her as one of the very first Americans. We'll start our conversation today with Naya because her remains are exactly what we need to retrace the spread of humankind across the globe. And it's as simple as that. When we find human skeletons and artifacts in a particular region of the world, they enable us to confirm or document our great human migration, both in timeline and in trajectory. And Naya, her presence on the Yucatan Peninsula, for example, clearly tells us that humans have been in the Americas for at least 12 to 13,000 years. But there are plenty of other discoveries that can help us document when our Homo sapien ancestors migrated and settled on new continents. So let's take a look. Essentially, we'll be Paleolithic detectives traveling the world over, right? We'll map out the story of how humans populated the Earth. Starting first in East Africa, we'll watch Homo sapiens spread into the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and eventually the Americas. Now, the 2014 Yucatan discovery, it was a game changer. And in a way, Naya could be dubbed the Lucy of Paleo-American studies. And that means that her remains rank amongst the oldest, most complete skeletons ever discovered in the Americas. And even more exciting to us anthro folks, well, it's the fact that her DNA, well, it actually documents a direct link to the present Native American lineages. Ultimately, this young woman, Naya, she affirms quite clearly that humans have been in the Americas for over 12,000 years. Now, just think about that for a moment. Then place this archaeological fact on the shelf so we can continue searching for other discoveries that will reveal even more details about the spread of humankind into the Americas. For context, let's review how and when humans first migrated from Africa. Let's look at the big picture. After over a century of revolutionary fossil discoveries, we've now got a clear idea of when the first hominins migrated out of Africa. Appearing nearly 2 million years ago was Homo erectus and his fossils that line the trail of their collective migrations into the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. They show up in Java about 1.8 million years ago, and in Europe and Asia not too long after that. The Zhoukoudian site near Beijing, for example, it's produced fossilized remains from some 40 different Homo erectus individuals, males, females, adults, children. And those fossils and others show us that by 800,000 years ago, Homo erectus was living as far as Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Southern Europe. Now, Homo erectus, they got around, but erectus has been extinct for 400,000 years. And unlike Homo sapiens, they never made it to North Asia or Northern Europe, let alone the Americas. So how did Homo sapiens pull this off? Well, the short of it is that Homo erectus went extinct, and then it was up to us, Homo sapiens, to settle the rest of the globe. But why did Homo erectus go extinct after spreading across Africa into South Asia and Europe? How did Homo sapiens come to populate the world? Let's review the three major theories out there. First, let's check out the regional continuity model. In this theory, as Homo erectus spread into Asia and Europe, these regional populations then took their own evolutionary paths to become modern Europeans and Asians. In other words, modern Europeans have a direct genetic link to the Homo erectus populations that preceded them in Europe. Now, proponents of this regional continuity model, they typically point to continuity and differences between Homo erectus and modern humans in Asia and Europe. Now, in complete contrast to the regional continuity model, our second theory, the complete replacement theory, that states that an intrepid line of Homo sapiens, they spread out from Africa and started populating the globe some 60,000 years ago. And actually, this complete replacement begins well before that with a relatively small population of Homo sapiens in Africa. Now, this theory states that these distinct populations eventually spread out of Africa and eventually populated the modern world. And in the process, they replaced Homo erectus and all other hominin populations. And if this complete replacement theory is true, one consequence is that modern Asians and Europeans would share direct, more recent genetic ties to each other and early Homo sapiens in Africa. Now, the third and final theory of how Homo sapiens outlived erectus and populated the globe is actually a compromise. It combines the regional continuity and the complete replacement models. And as a result, this last model, the partial replacement model, adds a rather salacious element of interbreeding. According to the partial replacement model, modern Homo sapiens, they spread rapidly well beyond the African continent some 60,000 years ago. And along the route, they interbred with and eventually replaced all other hominins, including the often maligned Neanderthal. And in defense of our dear Neanderthal cousins, despite the fact that they're not our direct descendants, they really weren't different from us. I mean, they were a bit shorter and stocky, and they had kind of big noses. They were well adapted to colder climates, but they were amazing big game hunters. And archaeologists, they tell us that like early Homo sapiens, they also buried their dead. Researchers recovered DNA from Neanderthal fossils, and because of the Neanderthal Genome Project, we now have great evidence to better discern the relationship between Homo sapiens and Neanderthal. Now, this may come as a shock to some of us, but proponents of all three of our human geography theories, they accept that there is significant evidence for interbreeding between modern humans and more archaic members of the hominin line, like Neanderthal. In fact, this interbreeding, it may have contributed to their decline. But despite the fact that we outbred and outlived Neanderthal, believe it or not, they're still among us to this day. Have you ever seen one? Well, would you believe you're looking and listening to one right now? Yeah, that's right, it's me. And I tell you what, I'm not alone. You see, most non-African populations, they still actually carry Neanderthal genes in their modern genome. When I recently had my DNA analyzed, I discovered that 2.3 of my own genome matches that Neanderthal genome. I mean, imagine that. Well, it's right in line with the general average, which is closer to about 3%, but I digress. Let's get back to the question of how and when humans populated the globe. As scientists, anthropologists love new evidence. And that's exactly what we received in 2015 when Beijing anthropologists discovered some 47 human teeth in a cave in southern China. These teeth, they dated to around 100,000 years ago. And actually, this discovery puts modern humans in East Asia early enough to lend support to that partial replacement model for the peopling of the world. Testable and correctable. It's one of the reasons I love this anthropology. So, what have we discovered thus far? First, we learned that modern humans who populated the Earth arose from an East African population who date back some 200,000 years ago. And second, we learned that the geographic distribution of Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and other late hominins, they also extended beyond Africa. But unlike Homo sapiens, they've all gone extinct, leaving us to explore and inhabit the planet. Putting the fossil record aside for just a moment, let's also consider our genetic trail. Because in addition to fossils, paleoanthropologists also rely on molecular genetics to retrace the global dispersal of humankind. And just as all humans share a common ancestor with all living primates, we also share a much more recent, earlier ancestor with all living Homo sapiens. Now, geneticists, they've traced our mitochondrial DNA and our Y chromosome DNA back to Africa. You see, we may share a common ancestor, but our DNA isn't identical. When a new mutation occurs and endures, that genetic marker, it's passed on to every subsequent generation. Our individual genomes, they carry these genetic markers, and they help us group you and me with people who share many of the same markers. So, thanks to molecular genetics, it's time we meet the ancestors that you and I share with every living human on the planet. It's time we meet mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. First, Y chromosome Adam. Y chromosome DNA is genetic material that males inherit from their father's line. Now, Y chromosome Adam isn't biblical Adam. He wasn't the first human male to walk on the planet. Rather, Y chromosome Adam, it's the term we use for the Homo sapien male ancestor that all living humans share. So, by dating the frequency of human mutations, geneticists estimate that this man lived in Africa perhaps as early as 100,000 years ago. And similarly, we've studied mitochondrial DNA from across the world in order to determine the woman from whom all modern humans descended. Well, this is big time, one of the most important foundational ideas in this lecture and course. So let's get specific about what we mean when we're talking about our human genetic trail. And I tell you what, it's magnificent. Mitochondrial DNA. Take a look at yourself, from your head to your toes. How many cells does it take to make you? You might be surprised to hear that all in, it's 37.2 trillion cells. In each and every one of them is a nucleus with 46 chromosomes, holding most of your inherited genetics. And that's your DNA. But that's not mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondria are outside of the nucleus, and they also contain DNA. Mitochondria are these little energy-producing machines, and they're the ones that help keep the cell going, right? Mitochondrial DNA, it's how we genetically explore our maternal inheritance. Because when a human egg is fertilized, chromosomes from a sperm cell enter the egg and combine with the DNA in the egg's nucleus. Hence, nuclear DNA is a mixture of both parents' DNA. The sperm cell's mitochondrial DNA, however, that never enters the egg. So the fertilized egg, it retains the mother's exact copy of her mitochondrial DNA. And that's why mitochondrial DNA are such amazing windows into our evolutionary past. For example, if you went back 100 generations, your nuclear DNA will have come from 100 men and 100 women. But remarkably, your mitochondrial DNA, it only comes from one woman. Everyone else, they're simply carrying that mitochondrial DNA forward. So based on their analysis of mitochondrial DNA from people all around the world, scientists estimate that our maternal line as humans dates back to mitochondrial Eve some 200,000 years ago. So like Y chromosome Adam, she too would have lived in Africa. Now again, it's important to note that mitochondrial Eve, she was not the first Homo sapiens woman to walk the earth. There would have been human women before her, and there would have been human women contemporary with her. But it was this particular woman who passed her mitochondria down through an unbroken female line to all humans living today. And in any case, as our Homo sapiens family grew, we migrated out of Africa and populated the entire planet. But it was our entry into the Americas that was our most recent game-changing mass migration. So for the final segment of this lecture, we'll look at the fossil record, genetics, and even climate history to map out the peopling of the Americas. It may sound like a strange place to start, but we need to understand a little about the world's climate over the past 30,000 years or so. Specifically, when we think about glaciers, we can see why Homo sapiens were the first hominin to make it to the Americas. And the short of it was this. We needed to get through the most recent ice age before we could migrate from Asia into the Americas. The last glacial maximum covered continents with ice sheets as recently as 30,000 years ago. And these ice sheets, they effectively closed the doors of human migration into Northern Europe and North America. But then, around 20,000 years ago, the ice started melting. And glacial melting, it actually increased sea levels and revealed new opportunities for human expansion into the New World. I mean, literally, it opened up new routes into North America through Siberia. This glacial melt, it created coastal and interior corridors, abundant in the kind of flora and fauna that would entice Homo sapien hunters and fishers. So, fellow paleo detectives, let's assemble the evidence. Remember Naya from our scuba adventure? Well, her presence in the Yucatan Peninsula, that tells us that humans have been in the Americas for at least 12,000 years. And that timing, well, it fits well with our knowledge of the receding ice sheets since the last glacial maximum. And if it was 20,000 years ago that the ice sheets began to recede and open new paths into the Americas, then we should expect to find fossils lining our route from Siberia. Now, let's do some archaeology to dig deeper and find the trail that led Naya and her ancestors into the Americas. First, let's head to the northern Yukon, to the Bluefish Caves. It's basically 3 small caves where early humans butchered animals probably around 25,000 years ago. And this is major. 25,000 years ago, this site and any population who lived there, they would have been cut off from the rest of North America by those massive ice sheets. I mean, the people who hung out in Bluefish Caves, they lived on the edge of the ice sheets, hunting large game like mammoth and caribou. Similarly, further to the west, on the Siberian side of things, we discovered a site on the Yana River with hundreds of tools made by mammoth-hunting humans. And they lived there around 27,000 years ago. So our stage is set. Here in Beringia, on the northern side of the last glacial maximum, right here in the Yukon and Siberia, we see evidence of human populations on the frontier. But below that, we haven't found any evidence of human presence in the Americas. But what happens once the glaciers melt and the ice sheets open new coastal and interior corridors to the south? Well, there's nothing conclusive that shows us human presence in the Americas south of the Yukon before 15,000 to 16,000 years ago. But that changes fast a couple thousand years later. What's the evidence? Well, maybe it was destiny that the company Nike emerged in Oregon, because it was Fort Rock Cave in Oregon where archaeology unearthed dozens of prehistoric shoes, some which dated to 10,000 years ago. So with sea levels down and a new land bridge connecting Siberia with Alaska, migration is open to all of the Americas. But it wasn't just the Pacific Northwest that attracted early human inhabitants. Near Murray Springs, Arizona, for example, we uncovered a site where nomadic hunters chased big game like mammoths and bison. The stone tools and fossilized bones date to over 12,000 years ago, and it's one of the earliest human sites in the Americas below Beringia and the Yukon. So, like those who lived near Fort Rock Cave, the Murray Springs mammoth hunters, they arrived only after the glacial melt made that possible. And these hunters, they left us one of the most prolific archaeological sites in Paleo-American studies. And finally, there's one other early site at Mount Verde in Chile, where archaeologists found foraged plants, plenty of tools, a hearth, and even some simple animal skin tents with poles. And this site, it dates to 12.5 thousand years ago. So, the archaeological record shows us that once the last glacial maximum began to fade, humans migrated south into the Americas. We have Naya's skeleton in Central America. We have artifacts in Mount Verdi in South America. And then there's those shoes back in Oregon. And they all tell us that humans have been in the Americas for thousands of years. So set the clock back 14,000 years ago, and we have definite human evidence in North and South America. Then, within a few thousand years, Homo sapiens were everywhere across North and South America. But were they all related? Are they all rooted in those mammoth hunting traditions coming through Beringia? The quick and easy answer is yes. Their toolkits and genetics tell us so. Remarkably, most of the people who first settled in the Americas shared a similar toolkit featuring a fluted stone tool called a Clovis point. It's about 2 fingers wide and shorter than a pencil. The Clovis point is more American than even jazz and apple pie. It's one of the first technological revolutions this continent has ever seen. You see, we figured this out when archaeologist Edgar Howard, he came running to Clovis, New Mexico in 1932 because he caught word that there was this local road crew and that they had uncovered all sorts of quantities of unknown ancient bones. So he ran there, he excavated the site, and you know what? He discovered layers and layers of mammoth bones. But there between the bones were seemingly countless specialized spearheads that early Americans had skillfully manufactured for big game hunting. What makes the Clovis point so unique is its amazing sharp edges that were fluted at the end. Now, knappers, they shaped these distinctive lance-like points and they'd insert them into spears and shafts. It's as if they were available at some prehistoric Ace Hardware store. I mean, all across North America, people used Clovis points to settle areas from the Pacific Northwest, the American South, and even into the Great Lakes. And since that first discovery back in New Mexico, we've now found thousands of Clovis points all across North America. And much in the same way smartphones bind contemporary humans into bands of iPhone and Android tribes, the Clovis point was a uniquely American invention. And that's what the Clovis point teaches us about the relationship between early Americans and the people who came out of Siberia. But what about genetics? Well, one of the most exciting 21st century discoveries in Paleo-American studies was a comprehensive study of the prehistoric Native American genome. It was a group of UC Berkeley researchers who sequenced the genome of 23 ancient humans found in North and South America, including the DNA of a 12,600-year-old boy who was buried in Montana with over 125 artifacts. These scientists compared ancient genomes with the genomes of 31 living Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Siberians. And the results are astounding. First of all, they showed us that these early Americans, they shared DNA markers with living 21st century Native Americans, as well as with people from the Pacific Islands and Siberia. Moreover, this consequential study clears up 2 enduring questions about the first Americans. 1. The first Americans arrived through Siberia after the last ice age was drawing to a close, starting around some 20,000 years ago. Second, this population remained in the north for several thousand years before splitting into northern and southern branches. And what's the evidence? Well, we've discovered there's plenty of evidence, and it's not just a bunch of Clovis points. We consulted the archaeology of Siberia, the Bering Strait, Alaska, and all the Americas. And if we map out the earliest sites across North and South America, we see a revealing timeline. Before 15,000 years ago, we don't see human sites anywhere, except for right up there in Beringia in the Yukon. And climate scientists told us, right, there was a very good reason for the late entry into the rest of North and South America, and that was the Ice Age, right? The waves of humans coming into the Americas, they had to wait until that ice barrier melted down, just around 15,000 years ago. But hold it. Isn't that the same time frame as the documented entry of the humans beyond the Yukon? You bet it was. Now, we anthropologists always remain open to new discoveries, and there's certainly a chance that into the future, we may discover earlier pre-Clovis sites in the Americas. And we may very well find the evidence for human migration outside of the Beringian model we discussed today. A great example is archaeologists who have investigated the possible presence of pre-Clovis humans along the Savannah River in South Carolina at a place called the Topper Site. Nevertheless, we've got to keep on digging. And in the meantime, let's stick with our testable and correctable story of humankind. So there we have it, Paleo-American Studies, the final chapter of how early humans spread throughout the world, the arrival of Homo sapiens in the Americas. 12,600-year-old DNA from a single prehistoric Montana boy profoundly changed the way we understand the history of humankind in the New World. And just like Naya's DNA from the Yucatan, his DNA is directly related to contemporary Native American genome. In fact, this lineage, his lineage, it accounts for approximately 80% of the contemporary Native American genome, from Native Alaskans in the north down to the Aymara people of South America. And even more fascinating is the fact that the Montana boy's DNA also indicates that he's a descendant from a line of humans with roots tracing back to Beringia and Siberia, and ultimately, of course, to Africa. We Homo sapiens have long been a wandering species. Our forebears never stopped moving, and as a result, for better or worse, all parts of the globe bear the mark of modern humanity. And yet, no matter how far and wide we've traveled, there remains the compelling fact that we can trace all of our roots to a shared geographical homeland and to the ancestors common to us all. And the big picture, well, it couldn't be clearer. Through anthropology, we discover not only the contours of the spread of humankind, but with genetics and geography, we reveal new ways to understand the oneness of the human race.